What's good, y'all? Welcome to another edition of the Liberty Cast. I'm your host, Big E. So, Congress passed and the president signed into law an historic stimulus bill to combat the effects of the coronavirus. Despite some of the good things that are in it, and there are some good things, there is a ton of total bull in it. And we will go over some of the more ridiculous provisions and also take a look at where all of this money is coming from. Now, the government has taken a lot of power in the wake of this pandemic. So how is that going to affect our liberty? And will they relinquish that power once this crisis is over? And there's a new front on the war on the Second Amendment and your right to keep and bear arms. And finally, Joe Biden is credibly accused of sexual assault. Coming right up, we'll get into all of that and a whole lot more. So the president signed the Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act into law. He and the rest of the Republicans were pretty much in a no-win situation here. Something had to be done, and even staunch conservatives such as myself and others understand that something needed to be done because this was not a result of anything that we could have prevented. Obviously the Chinese could have, but this was something that happened to us. So something had to be done. And just like Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. The left seized on this to try and put through every conceivable ridiculous spending appropriation that they possibly could. And the bill that the House originally proposed had some ridiculous things in it, such as a provision for allowing for same-day voter registration. Come on. You know that was a leftist ploy to get as many Democrat voters in there as they possibly could. And obviously, voter drives, getting people registered, that's great. But you and I both know that they were going to abuse that to the point where the only same-day registrations that would be filed would be Democrat. Everything they do is about winning elections, which baffles me as to why they would have stuck this much pork in the coronavirus bill in the face of this pandemic. We know they love to spend money, but why they chose to do this with this particular bill is beyond me. And Nancy Pelosi got smacked down pretty roundly for it, as she should have. I mean, in the bill she originally proposed, there was a provision for Planned Parenthood. What does abortion have to do with stopping a global pandemic? And windmills and all the rest of it. It was just insane. But they also knew that the Republicans would cave. Perhaps cave might be too strong a word, but we'll leave it there for now. They knew the Republicans would cave and pass whatever they had to make sure that they didn't look bad. Because the optics of blocking this stimulus bill would have been disastrous. And the president, if he were to veto it, it would have been the end of his presidency. And they knew that, which is why so much nonsense got stuffed into this bill. Thankfully, the abortion provision and the same-day voter registration provision did not make it. But check out some of the things that actually did. And these are some of the provisions that were in Nancy Pelosi's bill. And, you know, before we get into that, listen to this. Listen to what she had to say about the things that she had in this bill.
I want to have a unanimous consent. I want us to be able to go forward. It's not a bill I would have written in terms of some things that relate to family medical leave, that relate to worker protections, that ruling on worker protections. But that can be done administratively. We can find other ways. Not enough money for elections, et cetera, at this time. everything we're suggesting just relates to COVID-19. It's not about making law for the future. It's about COVID, well, except fighting COVID-19 is for the future, but I mean, it's not changing policy except as it applies here. So again, many of the provisions in there have been greatly improved because of negotiation.
Ask you about that.
That is one of the biggest, most obvious, total, bold-faced lies that she's ever told. Now check out some of the things that were in her original bill that made it into the Senate bill that the president signed. What does migration and refugee assistance to the tune of $350 million have to do with the coronavirus? What does $78,650,000 for salaries and expenses to the Bureau of Fiscal Service have to do with coronavirus? What does $293,500,000 to the IRS taxpayer services have to do with the coronavirus? What does $170 million also to the IRS for operation support have to do with the coronavirus? What does $37,200,000 again to the IRS for enforcement have to do with the coronavirus? Animal and plant health inspection services, I can't believe that's even an agency, but they're getting $55 million out of this bill. What does that have to do with coronavirus? What does $45 million for marketing services for the agricultural marketing service have to do with the coronavirus? NOAA, the Marshals Service, the FBI, the DEA, the federal prison system, NASA, Department of Energy. The Department of Energy got $99,500,000 for science. Literally, that's all it says in the bill, science. And those other agencies I mentioned, they all have carve-outs in this bill. Why? Why? None of them have anything to do with stopping the spread of the coronavirus or helping workers who have lost their jobs as a result of their businesses either going out of business or having to severely cut back as a result of the coronavirus. None of that makes any sense. This bill sets aside $400 million for election security grants. Now, in her original bill, there was a provision in there to allow for same-day voter registration. That language is not in the bill that was signed by the president. But what do you think $400 million for election security grants is going to, what do you think the purpose of that is? Who's going to administer those funds? And do you think there's any chance that some of it won't get used to try and promote some same-day voter registration drive? Come on. What does election security have to do with the coronavirus? $65 million went to housing opportunities for persons with AIDS. And this is a program authorized by the AIDS Housing Opportunity Act. Again, I ask, what does this have to do with coronavirus? And $25 billion was appropriated in this bill for transit infrastructure grants. $25 billion. Now, this bill is 880 pages long. The things that I'm rattling off here are just a few of the provisions that are in this bill. And if you think that those are absolutely ridiculous, and if you're listening to this show, I'm sure you do, here are two more that are, well, you listen and you decide. The Department of Education has a provision in this bill for an education stabilization fund in the amount of $30,750 million. Wow. And here is the kicker. Now, the amount is not as outrageous as that, but the House of Representatives, for salaries and expenses, has a provision for an additional $25 million. Now, I'd mentioned that I had heard that on social media and somebody asked me for a source and I hadn't yet been able to find it. Well, here it is. It's in the bill. And not just the one that Nancy Pelosi put forward with her wish list. It's in the bill that the president signed. The House of Representatives has $25 million with which they can give themselves a raise. What does the Department of Education have to do with stopping the Chinese coronavirus? And how is giving the House of Representatives a raise? They always vote to give themselves a raise. That's not a surprise. But what about the coronavirus? How does voting themselves a raise, or voting themselves the money with which they can now turn around and give themselves a raise, what does that have to do with fighting the Chinese coronavirus? Nothing. Not a damn thing. Now, I know that there are some people that are really upset with the Republicans and really upset with President Trump for signing this bill. And I get it. If this were under normal circumstances, I would have railed against this and I would be as upset with the president as anyone. But this is not a normal circumstance. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And the fact is that the economy is headed towards a recession. People have lost their jobs. I believe it was 5 times as many people lost their jobs in the past couple of weeks as they did during the entire Great Recession under the Obama administration. So, yeah, it sucks spending all this money. It sucks having to borrow all this money or print it, depending on which way they go. They can't print it because that leads to inflation, and that will just extend the bad economy, and that would just be another disaster. Not that borrowing it is a whole lot better. We were already $23 trillion in debt. But again, I don't think the Republicans really had much of a choice here. I think the only thing that, had it been included in this bill and they decided to not pass this, would be if the abortion stuff stayed in. I think then maybe if it didn't pass, the Republicans would get more of a pass for that because of the abortion issue. Maybe. And some people believe this is going to hurt President Trump's reelection campaign. If the Democrats were running someone even halfway competent, that might be true. And even if the rumors that they're trying to get Andy Cuomo in there and give him the nomination, even he, I think, is going to get smoked by the president. I don't think there's anyone in the left field, pun intended, that could really give President Trump a run for his money. It's not going to be Bernie Sanders. Biden is a terrible candidate. There's not a very deep bench there. So I think the president's going to be okay. I think enough people are happy with the fact that he signed this bill that I think he'll be okay. I don't think this will be what derails his reelection. All right, y'all. I really hate talking about coronavirus and everything that it entails. My day is 24/7 coronavirus. You can't get away from it. Well, I do get away from it a little bit, watching some stuff on Disney Plus, which I might talk about later on in the show if we have some time. But right now, we're going to take a break, and when we get back, we will talk about the impact that the panic surrounding the Chinese coronavirus is having on the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. One of the stories that you may be aware of, depending on where you're getting your news from, is that there has been a tremendous spike in gun sales since this virus took hold here in the United States. And a large part of that spike in those gun sales are first-time gun buyers. And this is a result of fear surrounding the coronavirus, and the left is trying to spin this as a ploy by the NRA to take advantage of those fears and sell guns. First off, the NRA doesn't sell guns. And second, the fear is being stoked by the leftist media. But leaving that aside for a second, what is it that people are afraid of besides contracting this virus? Well, for starters, a total breakdown of societal norms. Just last week, a woman was attacked and robbed of her groceries and wallet outside a grocery store in South Lake Tahoe. South Lake Tahoe. You don't hear a lot of crime stories coming out of South Lake Tahoe. And then you have Asian Americans who are being harassed and attacked as if they had something to do with the Chinese coronavirus. I was actually called out on social media for using the term Chinese coronavirus because it stokes racism. Obviously, I disagree. People who are going to go out and commit these crimes and harass Asian people, they're going to do it regardless of whether I or Dan Bongino or Sean Hannity or Ann Coulter or the president calls it by what it is. Now, I don't know if any of them have actually used the term Chinese coronavirus other than the president. I just use them to illustrate my point. Now, I have not called for any violence against anyone. I condemn any violence committed against anyone unless they are a direct threat to you or your family's safety. At that point, all bets are off. But back to the reasons for the skyrocketing gun sales. We're seeing people attacked for their groceries, harassed for being Asian. A black family was harassed at a grocery store in Pittsburgh, California, and denied service because the lead clerk accused them of trying to steal lemons. I mean, people's true nature is revealed in times of crisis. We talked about how a lot of these first-time gun buyers are leftists, but are coming around to the realization that there are bad people out there, and it is incumbent upon us as individuals to protect ourselves. And in light of the spread of this virus and how serious it is, and it is serious, what happens if the people who the leftists believe are the only ones who should have guns, the police? What if half your police force is out sick? What if half your sheriff's department is out sick? It already takes about 8 minutes for the police to respond on average. And obviously that's much longer for those of us in rural areas, which it's more like 20 to 30 minutes. And this is even more troubling when you realize that the average violent encounter, the average violent home invasion, lasts less than 5 minutes. Now, whenever we talk about this topic, I tell you that the anti-Second Amendment, anti-constitutional leftists do not care one whit for your safety, whether you vote for them or not. Just because you might be a Democrat and you vote Democrat, that is of little consequence to them. Well, your safety is of little consequence to them. Your vote is of the utmost consequence. But after that, they couldn't care less about you. And when I say that, I don't just say that as a throwaway line. When I say that, I offer you something they've done as proof. Case in point, closing gun stores so people who do want to protect themselves don't have access to the tools that they can use to protect themselves. If there was ever an example of an infringement upon your right to keep and bear arms, that's it. I mean, that's the very definition of infringement. But we'll circle back to that in a second. They're also releasing criminals from jails and prisons to, quote, protect them from coronavirus. So they're releasing these individuals at the same time taking away your ability to protect yourself from these criminals, in addition to the ones that are already roaming free and looking to do damage. Are those things that someone who thinks your safety is important would do? Well, of course, the answer is no. They don't just want to infringe on your rights. They don't think owning guns is a right, which is why the governor of New Jersey classified gun stores as non-essential businesses and therefore had to close. And the governor of Pennsylvania and the sheriff of LA County also ordered gun stores closed. The LA County sheriff, he flip-flopped and went back on that, and then the very next day ordered them closed again. So that guy is a hot mess. A number of quotes by the Founding Fathers are coming to mind right now. One that's actually on the LibertyCast website Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. That was from Benjamin Franklin. One of my favorites, though, is Patrick Henry. And I think this is because he was one of the most ardent proponents of citizens being armed. In one of his speeches to the Constitutional Convention in 1788, he said, quote, "My great objection to this government is that it does not leave us the means of defending our rights or of waging war against tyrants." A number of his more famous quotes actually came from that speech, and I encourage you all to read it. But the government ordering businesses to close is the very definition of tyrannical, is it not? Now, I am not suggesting that we need to rise up against the government in an armed insurrection because of this. But now that they see that they can get away with this kind of overreach, the next time, and make no mistake, there will be a next time, the situation won't be nearly as serious as a pandemic. Now, there were suits brought against the governors and the sheriff. The one in Pennsylvania actually went all the way to the state Supreme Court, which ended up ruling in the governor's favor. There were a couple of judges that did dissent, but clearly not enough. But it's not just Pennsylvania, New Jersey, LA County. We're talking New Mexico. The governor there has ordered gun stores to be closed. In North Carolina, the Wake County sheriff is not going to issue new permits to purchase pistols for more than a month. So if you are a first-time gun buyer who feels like you need to protect yourself because things are getting dicey, you're just SOL. And in Maine, the governor there has ordered gun stores to be closed. And in Delaware, they are open by appointment only. So you have to call ahead, make an appointment. And if you call and they're closed and nobody's there to answer the phone, well, then what? I mean, it's just ridiculous. But let's do one of the things that leftists never do when they make these ridiculous decisions. Let's play this out. Let's take it to its logical conclusion. In about 25 years, when the next crisis hits, and the people who are in college right now or right now in entry-level positions, when those people who are clearly leftists sympathize with socialism, don't believe that guns belong in polite society, when those people hold the reins of power, what do you think they're going to do? They've been raised to believe that socialism and government intrusion into our lives is not a necessary evil, but necessary. And so in 25 years, when they're the ones that are in charge, the Second Amendment is going to go bye-bye. There will be somebody in the mold of a Bernie Sanders in the White House. And the judiciary will be, put it this way, the standard for the judiciary will not be interpreting the Constitution. It will be what can they do to destroy the Constitution. And frankly, it may get to a point with those people in charge where they just abandon the Constitution altogether. Rewrite a governing document that bears no resemblance at all to the Constitution, but has language in it taken from the Communist Manifesto. You may think I'm being dramatic. You may think I'm overreacting. You may think that there is absolutely no way that anything like that could happen. 5 years ago, everybody said there was no way Donald Trump could get elected president. Yet, here we are. How quickly things change. Benjamin Franklin once said when asked what type of government they created, he responded, "A republic, if you can keep it." I'm really not so sure how long we can hold on to it at this point. All right, y'all, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to finish this topic up and then move on to Joe Biden and his most recent sexual assault allegations. So we were talking before the break about the government and how they've been amassing even more power in the wake of this pandemic. They've ordered people to shelter in place, ordered businesses to have their people work from home if they can operate that way. Now, of course, I was in favor of businesses sending their people home because, I mean, in this day and age, why not be virtual? And I think a lot of businesses will find that they can save money on rent and things of that nature by going virtual. But ordering businesses to close or to go virtual sounds a lot more like martial law than public safety. There's actually a great article up at Mises.org, and I'll have a link to it up on the website that you should read because it is definitely worth your time. All right, moving on. I don't know about you, but I'm old enough to remember that when Brett Kavanaugh, now Justice Brett Kavanaugh, was accused of sexual misconduct, running a gang rape ring, the left went bananas. Everything was about Me Too, and that was the birth of the all women should be believed all the time nonsense. So now Joe Biden has been credibly accused of sexual assault, and we're hearing crickets from the media. Now, to be fair, which is what we here at the Liberty Cast do, I would say that this allegation is credible and should be investigated. And if the left had any principles, they would feel the exact same way.
How would you suggest that the Senate handle these allegations?
I think they should do an FBI investigation. We did that for Anita Hill. Took 2 days.
That was Joe Biden responding to a question about Brett Kavanaugh and what should happen with Christine Blasey Ford. I think that there should be some due process, just like with Brett Kavanaugh. But back in 2018, the left said that due process was not applicable because this was essentially a job interview, which was ridiculous on its face. But if we keep consistent with that, is not a presidential campaign a job interview? He's campaigning. He wants the job of President of the United States. So if the left actually had any principles, if the left actually had any standards, then they would be holding Joe Biden to the same standard to which they held Brett Kavanaugh. Now, here's the thing. If the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh were deemed credible, then Tara Reade's allegations against Joe Biden absolutely are. Now, I'm going to be surprised if anything substantive comes out of this. The left is going to portray this woman, Tara Reade, as a Russia-loving operative because she wrote a couple of papers or articles singing the praises of Vladimir Putin and Russia. She's probably a bit of a whack job just based on that alone, but that does not mean that what she's alleging didn't happen, and doesn't mean that her accusation is not credible.
It takes enormous courage for a woman to come forward and the bright lights of millions of people watching and relive something that happened to her, assert that something happened to her. And she should be treated with respect. What should happen is the woman should be given the benefit of the doubt and not be abused again by the system. But I hope that they understand what courage it takes for someone to come forward and relive what they believe happened to them and let them state it, but treat her with respect.
She doesn't seem to be getting much respect at all. In fact, the nonprofit organization Time's Up, which is a nonprofit organization that came about as a result of the Me Too movement, and they help survivors of sexual assault tell their stories, and they also have a legal defense fund, which they use to provide funding for PR and legal assistance in these types of cases. And in fact, they were instrumental in a number of the cases against Harvey Weinstein. But in this case, they are declining to help Tara Reade because of the person she's accusing, which is a Democrat presidential candidate in Joe Biden. Now, you and I both know if she was accusing Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Donald Trump, any conservative, any Republican, if she was accusing one of them of sexual misconduct like this, Time's Up would be all over it. The media would be all over it. They would be fighting for airtime between coronavirus, the Chinese coronavirus, and this story. You know it. But like I said. All right, y'all, that is our show. I want to thank you all for spending this time with me today. I know you're probably tired of all the coronavirus nonsense. I know I am. But I wanted to try and hit it from a couple of different angles that you may not have, you're not hearing on the mainstream media. So I hope that I was able to impart some knowledge that you might not otherwise have gotten. But please check us out on your favorite podcast platform, Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast content from. Subscribe, leave a review, let us know what you think. I look forward to reading your feedback. If there's a subject you would like for us to examine, please let me know and I'll be happy to do that. You can also find us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Parlay, at The Liberty Cast on all 4 of those platforms. Hit us up there with memes, comments about the show, whatever you like. And I will do my best to respond in a timely manner. But again, folks, thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.